So now that you've been introduced to what a derivative is, let's get into how to calculate one. There are a few rules to calculating derivatives, and the first one we're going to go through is the constant rule, probably the simplest rule of them all. So the constant rule of derivatives applies when a function, f of x, is a constant. So let's use the example of y is equal to 5. Here we have the function y is equal to 5, or sometimes we might write this as f of x is equal to 5. We're saying f of x because the way we have it shown here graphically is that y is a function of x. We have x on the horizontal axis right here and y on the vertical axis right here. And we're showing y as a function of x. Thus, the derivative is going to be talking about how y changes with respect to x. So the derivative is the measure of the rate of change or the slope of this function. So we've already graphed y in terms of x right here. We have y is equal to 5, so it forms a line at y is equal to 5. For all x values, y still is 5. It just doesn't change. So tying that back to what the derivative is, how is y changing with respect to x? What is the slope of this function? We can see that this is a flat line. In other words, there is no slope, or the slope is equal to 0. There's no incline here. We can also say that the rate of change, as x changes by 1 unit, y changes by, well, it doesn't change at all. So y changes by nothing. So the derivative dy over dx, how y changes with respect to x, is equal to 0. Y simply doesn't change as x changes. So our first derivative here is equal to 0. Let's look at another function that's a constant. Here we have y is equal to 2. Once again, we can see that as x changes from left to right, y doesn't change. So our derivative, this time I'm going to write it as y prime, is 0. There is 0 change in y as x changes. When y is equal to 100, once again, we have y as a constant. Thus, as x changes, as x goes from left to right, y isn't changing, so the derivative dy over dx is equal to 0. And that goes for whether y is equal to a positive value or a negative value. Here we have y is equal to negative 10. It's still a constant even though it's negative. So as x is increasing over here from left to right, we're still not seeing any change in y. Y is negative 10 regardless of what x is. So our derivative here, this time I'm going to write it as a function of x. So f prime of x, the derivative, we put the prime in there to indicate derivative, is equal to 0. So whenever we have y as a constant, we can see that there is no change, no slope happening in our function, and therefore the derivative is 0. We write this in your formula sheet when y is equal to some constant c, or f of x is equal to some constant c, our derivative is equal to 0. And there is the constant rule of derivatives.